You know, I'm actively getting to the point that my interest is starting to dry up with the MCU, and it's actually becoming painful to see so many beloved icons and stories relegated to background noise for the purpose of pushing incoherent plot points and seeing wasted potential with poor adaptations.
Make it stop!
Phase 4 was essentially written off as the gas leak year to the MCU's run, where certain personalities and character motivations were wildly inconsistent with previous encounters, the humour was tacky and tailored, the writing became increasingly sloppy, everything was isolated with a lack of direction, and the degrees of innovation had eroded into stale gimmickry that lacked any sincerity and creativity, leaving an incredibly bitter aftertaste for most fans worldwide, not to mention the personal hang-ups with titles like She-Hulk that felt less like a superhero show and more of a personal rant.
Good times.
And since then, barely any interest has remained entering the next step for Marvel, that has seen nothing but diminishing returns, and part of the blame goes to the marketing, where it either exposes what the writers want to say, or it masks it within drama and a fresh take on a better written piece of material.
You didn't see anything, right?
Secret Invasion was presented as a dark thriller spy series, shrouded in darkness, where beneath the surface of all positions in life lurks an alien race, instructed to integrate with all around them with the promise of refuge and a new start sooner rather than later. But thanks to one deranged sociopath that initially had understandable motivations and nuance galore, who was dismissed the promise of a fresh start for him and his people, was then written to be this irredeemable prick that was willing to sacrifice the remnants of his species and an entire other species to settle a vendetta.
What are you, fucking stupid?
It's writing like this that feels confused and erratic, whilst at first being shown to be thought-provoking and curious, that makes me question whether the writers currently on strike intentionally fucking hijacked this show before leaving the room, with how poorly structured it was in the final hours, yet led with such promise in between.
We're on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
There was a lot of expectations saddled on this series, as it was made to feel like a refreshing inclusion that strips away the flashy, campy heroics we've known from the MCU over the years, and instead takes a more intrusive look at the life of Nick Fury and the consequences of his manipulations and lies that, while fueled with good intent, fell into the middle distance in his list of priorities. And what we got was a weakened Fury who complains about losing sight of everything like he once had, despite removing himself from the planet for so long, and a resolution to the conflict that he should have resolved personally was instead left to the latest girl boss to take a dose of everyone ever known in the MCU to end the blood feud in one of the worst CG fights I've seen for some time. While in between, we see hollow signs of deception and trickery round every corner, with a wasted death and one of the most absurd twists that dilutes a beloved character's journey that fans became invested in but is now rendered pointless, with Marvel no doubt going to try and backpedal on this as we move forward, but don't hold your breath.
You had one job.
Just the one?
And ultimately what it leaves us with is nothing but another dead attempt at restarting this franchise with an engine that I feel burned out after Endgame, that's just become an equally forgettable title to the growing list of broken dreams.
And nothing can go wrong. Oh no, it all went wrong.
I won't sit here and pretend to be a comic book connoisseur, but I have read the Secret Invasion comics, and I remember what that version of events made me feel, as there was an air of anxiety to everything, and an unsettling feeling as you turned each page, never knowing if another one of your favourite heroes was actually a shapeshifter, thereby compromising the relationships that both you and the characters had with them, and with long-lasting implications. Where compared to this Cold War-style take on the story, we received no actual heroes, no real sense of danger, and a rush to the finish line with the inclusion of Super Skrulls, and ultimately this show struggled to evoke that tension and fear that this demands, and the result is that for a 6-episode run, every compelling step is smacked with an air of boredom and displeasure.
Hello and welcome to Standing Up School. And you fail.
Among many of the issues this show possesses, the first came from the fact that they robbed the audience of any intrigue and paranoia that the comic series perfected, as all the faces we needed to know were just revealed to us in the first 2 episodes with no methodical delivery, no compulsion to suspect who was what, and no regard for the impact the reveals could have had. Couple that with the writing and scripting that made it aggressively clear who was and wasn't a Skrull in the case of Rhodey and Ross, and many of the visuals and movements that were done to feel intimidating and demonstrate who the enemy is, came off as feeling like a poor magic trick, made worse by the fact that the world is supposed to be at stake here, with this malignant leader becoming increasingly unhinged as the story progressed, threatening to end it all and has rooted his people throughout human society, yet it never felt like a matter of urgency or any authentic danger was ever present.
Now, here's my everything's okay alarm.
There was no stress, no claustrophobic moments that squeezed the revelation out of Nick or the President, for example, that would make the reveals more shocking. Half the time, the characters didn't even seem surprised, so why would the audience? And then possibly the biggest issues that stem from this one is the death of Maria Hill, Scrody, Gravik's thinly written arc, and Gaia now suddenly being the most powerful individual in the universe.
God, you're making me beat up crap!
Maria Hill never felt like a prominent figure throughout the MCU, but regardless was always at Fury's side for the larger moments, so she became an associated figure over the years, and Kobe Smulders always delivered the stoic and authoritative personality perfectly, whilst lacing empathy within her character too. And for someone so rooted in the journey of the MCU, you'd have thought her death would mean something, yet despite Fury being instructed to make her loss count in the end by her mother, she doesn't pop up again or is even mentioned beyond episode 2. She was the motivation but lost in the conflict, which I think is a disservice to her character. So truthfully, why would you even bother bringing her back? Fury honestly had the motivation he needed to compete with Gravik as this global threat of juiced up aliens were on the warpath to try and take Earth themselves. But nope, we needed this shit apparently too. And I honestly wouldn't have minded losing Hill if it actually stuck with Fury in his pursuit of this mission, but she doesn't seem to matter after the first act.
You're on your own. See you, buddy.
Then, Scrody. Now, if this turns out to be a simple misdirect and actually the real Rhodey hasn't been trapped in the Skrulls' basement since Civil War, then I'll eat my words. But as it is right now, if this turns out to in fact be the case and he has been stuck with them since the events of Civil War, then what the fuck is wrong with you, Marvel?
Who said it? Get the cameras on them. Put the lights down their faces, creep me out.
You have just destroyed one of the better written characters in the MCU by retconning his history as moments of necessity rather than choice. If this is the case, it would eviscerate any character work applied to him and makes things rather inconsistent, as Rhodes here was more hostile, antagonistic and manipulative compared to what we know his demeanour to be. You have just backed yourselves into a corner with this character, and of all the possible changes that could have happened with a story like this one makes the least amount of sense to me and is just insulting to his legacy, so my hope is that this is a misdirect. Then Gravik, another antagonist thrown to the wolves, given all the weight and performed by a credible actor that delivered on those rage-filled moments, was wasted with thinly written development, with his actions and dialogue lacking a bite and complexity as the season went by. As the story continues, he starts to feel regrettably more generic, with a lot of similarities to Karli Morgenthau from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who's another poorly conceived, sympathetic terrorist that was let down by those who swore to protect them, and due to that betrayal begins walking a vengeful path. So ultimately, Gravik started to feel rather derivative as an antagonist, as we'd seen this before, and it just shows that there's a template forming for Marvel shows that utilise the thriller genre, not to mention as well that his final showdown with Fury did little for his credibility.
No, he's got a point.
Which leads me to my final complaint here, Gaia. Now, quite honestly, I couldn't give two shits if a woman is placed in the position of an overpowered hero, as my concerns lie with the execution of this and the writing. Her character arc throughout the series was pretty forgettable to the point of non-existent for me, as we only saw what was necessary for the plot, that it didn't feel like there was time to explain her motivations, and we didn't get much time with her as it was. So to place such a moment on her back didn't land as hard as I think the writers wanted it to. Her potential in the MCU could be quite an issue going forward as well, as now she possesses the powers of the MCU's best and deadliest, which would render the other heroes obsolete and now removes any believability in her character, where the stakes are lessened because she has the power to do anything. If she's ever in a compromising situation, you won't believe it to be a threat, as she literally has all the tools to combat it. The idea of Captain Marvel being the most powerful MCU hero was frustrating enough to me, as I prefer my heroes to be fallible, modest, and not without hardships. Beyond this, quite honestly, what could you even have her go through that would make her relatable or show a chink in the armor? People need to believe in their heroes, and you've possibly created one that's so unbelievable that it's practically a joke, let alone debuting her with such a terrible display of CGI.
Not a great plan.
But despite these gripes, this show seriously did have some incredible moments to it, with much of the heavy lifting coming from Don Cheadle, Olivia Colman, Kingsley Benadir and Samuel L. Jackson, who especially felt like he was clocking that time card for the last time. And despite my earlier jabs at him, Jackson was Fury in this, even if it felt like he was just going through the motions and introducing this powerless, frightened version of a once fearless hero. It made for a fascinating insight into a man confronting his own mortality and struggling to find his sense of purpose in a post-blip world. world, even though it was dominated by the plot as quickly as it was introduced. There were some fantastic scenes throughout the series that exemplified what the potential was for it, like Rhodey and Fury's table talk, anything with Sonya, and the final discussion between Fury and Gravik. The gritty take on the MCU is something that fans have longed for, but all the visuals in the world and tonal shifts can't make up for how inconsistent this series was. And to be honest, I'm getting pretty fucking tired of saying that there's always room for potential and they never quite meet it. At this point, if you're still a Marvel lifer and can see only the excellence of disastrous writing like these Disney Plus shows possess, then I have to believe that you're on the source, but it doesn't mean that your points are invalid. But honestly, the only way that you can love something like the MCU in the state it is now is through the eyes of a loving mother that's just given birth to a piece of shit baby. And as we've seen, it's not until Marvel releases one of their latest unimaginative endeavours that everyone calls it out for what it is. I truthfully tried to be as optimistic as I can heading into each of these MCU projects, but I keep feeling let down, and it's exhausting at this point, and I wish we could turn the clock back and gather up the writers and directors of old that really took time to craft something incredible that sits as memorable today as it was then, where instead we're getting funneled with cheap looking sloppy seconds that no one wants. But if Disney wants to continue letting the Secret Invasion continue within their own ranks of people, tanked for ideas, or don't care to adapt what worked before, then honestly just let it burn to the fucking ground. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you like what you saw here, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new around these parts, and until next time everyone, take care, and I'll catch you later.